The rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the small rural cemetery into a sea of gray and mud. Thunder grumbled somewhere in the distance, a low, discontented sound that matched the weight in every heart gathered there. Black umbrellas dotted the landscape like sorrowful mushrooms, shielding tear-streaked faces from the unrelenting downpour. In the center of it all stood a white coffin, far too small for the weight it carried. The town preacher spoke in hushed tones, his voice barely carrying over the soft weeping and the steady drumming of the rain. Family members clutched each other for support. Friends lingered nearby, their heads bowed low. At the back of the gathering stood a group of bikers, leather jackets soaked through, heavy boots rooted in the mud. They were rough-looking men, faces weathered and worn, but every eye brimmed with grief. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a heartbreak the whole town could feel. Midway through the preacher's words, when the silence between raindrops seemed almost holy, a collective gasp tore through the crowd. Heads turned. Movement flickered at the tree line beyond the graves. Out of the mist and dripping forest lumbered a massive bear. Scarred, thick-furred, its pelt matted from the rain, the bear moved with a slow, deliberate grace that sent shivers down spines. It was no ordinary bear. There was something haunted, something unbearably human in the way it carried itself. Panic rippled through the mourners. A woman screamed. Another man stumbled backward into the muddy grass. "Run!" someone shouted. The crowd shifted in confusion. Some frozen in place, others moving blindly. But the bikers didn't run. They stepped forward instead, forming a loose wall between the bear and the mourners, shoulders squared, hearts pounding. One of them, a broad man with a silver beard, reached subtly toward the knife at his belt. The bear, however, didn't charge. It didn't roar. It didn't rear up or bare its teeth. Instead, it lifted its nose to the sky, sniffing through the falling rain as if searching for something lost. A low, mournful whimper rumbled from deep in its chest. Slowly, carefully, it moved forward, not toward the people, but toward the small white coffin. Every step was deliberate, every move heartbreakingly tender. The bikers tensed, unsure whether to intervene. But the bear merely approached the coffin and, with the softest touch of one massive paw, brushed the lid as if trying to wake whoever slept inside. A sound, something between a sigh and a sob, escaped the creature. It lowered its head and lay down in the mud beside the coffin, pressing its wet nose against the polished wood. It whined again, so softly that only those closest could hear. The rain continued to fall, but now it blurred with the tears of those who watched. Hardened men who had ridden through deserts and storms now wiped at their eyes with trembling fingers. Mothers clutched their children tighter, overwhelmed by the raw, aching grief radiating from the enormous animal. No one spoke, no one moved. The bear, this stranger, this wild creature, mourned more purely than words could ever express. At the back of the crowd, the bikers exchanged uneasy glances. "This ain't right," muttered one, a lean man with tattoos creeping up his neck. His voice was hoarse, almost afraid. "Bears don't do this. They don't mourn." Another biker, younger, nodded stiffly. His knuckles were white around the handle of his helmet. "Something's wrong," he said, voice cracking. "Real wrong." Across the field, the sheriff, a stern man known more for his pragmatism than his heart, moved his hand toward the rifle slung across his back. His intentions were clear. The bear, whatever its behavior now, could become dangerous in an instant. The tension twisted tighter, ready to snap. Fingers tightened around weapons. Breath caught in throats. Then, "Wait!" the biker with the silver beard shouted, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. All eyes snapped to him. He pointed, wide-eyed, at the bear's leg, and what they saw made the world tilt on its axis. Wrapped around the bear's thick, rain-matted fur was something unmistakable. A small, handmade bracelet, woven from colorful threads, now faded and tattered from weather and time. a bracelet identical to the ones the little girl had loved making for everyone she cared about. The mourners stared, frozen. The sheriff's hand hovered in the air, rifle forgotten. The bikers stepped closer, eyes narrowing, hearts pounding. The rain softened to a mist. The bear didn't move. It simply lay there, guarding the girl's coffin with a loyalty so deep, so heartbreaking, that none could deny. This was no random animal. This was someone who knew her. And somehow, some way, this story was only just beginning. The crowd stood frozen in a surreal silence, their eyes glued to the colorful faded bracelet knotted tightly around the bear's thick leg. It was unmistakable. Even waterlogged and worn, the pattern, little pink and blue diamonds, was the same kind the girl had loved to weave for her closest friends. One of the bikers, the youngest among them, took a slow step forward, his mouth slightly open as if words might escape without permission. "That's hers," he whispered. Another biker nodded grimly. "Yeah," he said, voice thick. "No doubt about it." The bear, or shadow, though no one yet knew its name, remained still, shivering slightly from cold and grief, one massive paw still resting against the coffin's side. The sheriff hesitated, his fingers slowly uncurling from the rifle strap. Doubt flickered across his stern face. He wasn't a cruel man, but years of instinct screamed that wild animals didn't belong this close to people. Before anyone could speak further, another wave of memories washed over the gathering like mist rising off the damp earth, but this time they belonged to her. The little girl, and the secret she had carried. Months earlier, the forest had been alive with the colors of late summer, golds, greens, and fiery reds. Birds chattered overhead, streams giggled over stones. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. It was on one of these bright afternoons that she had first stumbled upon the tiny bear cub. He had been lying in a dry creek bed, his leg twisted unnaturally beneath him, whimpering in pain. Flies buzzed around the wound. His fur was patchy, and his ribs showed sharp against his sides. Most kids her age would have screamed and run, but not her. Moving slowly, she had crouched a safe distance away, speaking softly, her voice like a bomb. She had gone back home that night, gathered scraps of food, stolen gauze from her father's emergency kit, and returned to the woods. Day after day, she tended to the cub, cleaning his wound, feeding him bits of bread and apples, sitting close enough that he could see she meant no harm. She named him Shadow because of how he melted into the trees, silent and watchful. Soon enough, Shadow would drag himself closer when he saw her coming. Later still, he would nuzzle her hand, licking her fingers with a warm, rough tongue. Their bond grew stronger than any words could describe. She weaved him a bracelet, her way of showing love, and tied it carefully around his ankle, giggling when he tried to bite it playfully. She never told anyone, not her parents, not her friends. The world wouldn't understand a friendship like this, she knew. They would be afraid. They would try to take him away. And so, Shadow remained her beautiful secret, their private magic. But magic, no matter how fierce, can be fragile. Just days before the funeral, a cruel twist of fate had struck. A slippery road, a blind curve, a truck that couldn't stop in time. She had been walking home from school, her arms full of books and bright dreams. She never had a chance. Shadow had waited for her that day, pacing anxiously at their hidden spot deep in the woods. He waited until nightfall. He waited until hunger gnawed at his belly and loneliness scraped at his heart. Still, she did not come. Driven by desperation, guided by scent and instinct, Shadow had left the safety of the trees. He had crossed roaring highways, dodged honking cars. He had slunk past barking dogs and curious humans. Every heartbeat had pulled him closer to town, closer to her, and when he finally found her, lying cold and still in a strange wooden box surrounded by crying people, he had not understood, only that she was here, and that he would not leave her again. Back in the rain-soaked cemetery, the bikers gathered in a tight huddle. One of them pulled something from his pocket, a small, battered notebook, the cover decorated with childish doodles. The girl's diary. It had been found among her things after the accident, unread until now. With trembling fingers, the biker opened it to a bookmarked page and began to read aloud, voice breaking. "Today, Shadow licked my face when I gave him apples. I think he loves me. I made him a friendship bracelet so he'll always remember me. He's my best secret. My best friend in the whole world." Another page. "Sometimes I wish people were more like bears. They don't judge. They just love." Tears blurred the words. No one could speak for a long moment. The sheriff cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at the coffin. "We still can't have a bear here," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's dangerous. For everyone." The bikers bristled. One of them, a tall woman with fierce eyes, stepped forward. "He's not dangerous," she said fiercely. "He's grieving." "He's family," another added. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the mourners. Even those who had been most afraid now looked upon Shadow with a tenderness they hadn't expected to feel. The sheriff sighed heavily, torn between duty and heart. "This isn't how things are done," he muttered. "Maybe it's how they should be done," the silver-bearded biker said quietly. Tension crackled in the heavy, rain-drenched air. The question hung there, unspoken but burning. Was it really safer to break the bond of loyalty and love standing before them? Before anyone could answer, a sudden, frantic movement shattered the stalemate. Shadow rose onto all fours with surprising speed, sending a spray of mud flying from his paws. A deep, desperate sound ripped from his throat, something between a growl and a sob. Then he began to dig. Frantically, fiercely, right beside the coffin. Claws tore through mud and wet grass with terrifying force. The mourners gasped. The sheriff swore and took a cautious step forward. The bikers froze, unsure whether to intervene or watch. What was he doing? Why was he tearing at the earth so desperately? The rain pounded harder. The world seemed to hold its breath, and as the first clump of earth flew away, something small and pale glinted in the mud. Something that made the nearest biker stumble back, eyes wide with shock. Whatever Shadow was searching for, it wasn't random. It was something buried, something important. And somehow it was connected to the girl. And the truth none of them were ready to face. The bear's powerful claws shredded the wet earth with a ferocity that made the mourners instinctively step back. Mud sprayed up in thick clumps. The sheriff tightened his grip on his rifle again, his face etched with confusion and suspicion. "Get ready," he muttered to the biker standing nearest to him. "If he's digging to get to her—" "Wait," the tall, silver-bearded biker barked, holding out a hand. His sharp eyes were locked on Shadow's frantic movements, studying every gesture. "He's not trying to hurt her." More people edged closer now, curiosity overriding fear. What they saw stopped them cold. Shadow wasn't clawing at the coffin. He was digging several feet beside it, exactly at a spot where the graveyard grass looked slightly disturbed, but not by any official funeral arrangements. The bear's sides heaved with effort. His mournful grunts broke the stunned silence as he drove deeper into the soft earth. Then, with one last swipe, Shadow unearthed a small mud-caked wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, delicate, handmade. The bear nosed it gently, letting out a soft whimper, then backed away, his head bowed low, almost as if in reverence. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. The sheriff slowly lowered his rifle. One of the bikers, the youngest with shaking hands, stepped forward. He knelt in the mud, brushing the dirt off the lid. His fingers found a simple latch, nearly rusted shut. He clicked it open. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic to protect it from the elements, was a folded letter. The outside was labeled in a childish but steady hand. "If anything happens to me—" The young biker swallowed hard. The silver-bearded biker crouched beside him, nodding once. "Read it," he said hoarsely. The young man unfolded the paper, his voice cracking as he began. "If anything happens to me, please don't be scared of Shadow. He's not like the others say bears are. He saved me when I was lost in the woods. He was hurt, and I helped him, but he helped me more. Shadow is my best friend. He's gentle and brave and loyal. He protected me when I was scared. I promised him I'd always come back. If I can't, please take care of him. Let him live free, or let him stay with people who will love him like I did. Please don't let them hurt him. Please remember he's not just an animal. He's family. Love, Sophie." The words hung in the air like a benediction. The tough, leather-clad bikers bowed their heads, their shoulders trembling with grief and awe. The townspeople, many of whom had clutched their umbrellas like weapons only minutes before, now wiped tears from their eyes, their earlier fear melting away into profound sadness. Even the sheriff, hardened by years of enforcing the law, looked away, blinking rapidly against the sudden burning in his eyes. No one spoke for a long, heavy moment. Finally, the silver-bearded biker stood up slowly, the letter trembling in his fist. He turned toward the sheriff, his voice steady but fierce. "You read it," he said. "You see what she wanted." The sheriff nodded stiffly, jaw clenched tight. "You're right," he admitted grudgingly. His voice was rough gravel. "It's her wish, and it's her day." He looked around the gathered crowd, the grieving faces, the sobbing family members, the mourning bikers, the bear sitting quietly in the mud, staring at the coffin with such profound sadness that it broke something inside every onlooker. With a heavy sigh, the sheriff unfastened the leather strap of his rifle, slinging it over his back. He pulled off his hat, pressed it to his chest. "I'm handing authority over to you folks," he said quietly. "You loved her. You knew her best." He glanced at Shadow, then back at the bikers. "Decide what happens next." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The tension that had gripped the funeral like a clenched fist slowly began to ease, replaced by a bittersweet, aching peace. The bikers, brothers and sisters bound not by blood but by loyalty, gathered close. Shadow lifted his head slightly, his dark, soulful eyes flickering from one face to another. He didn't roar. He didn't move. He simply waited for their judgment. The sun, hidden behind thick clouds all day, chose that exact moment to break through. A single beam of golden light pierced the sky, falling like a blessing across the cemetery, illuminating the girl's coffin, the mud-caked box, and the grieving bear. The silver-bearded biker stepped forward, his boots sinking into the soft, wet earth. He met Shadow's eyes squarely, his voice thick but strong. "I think," he said, "Sophie's got one last ride planned." He turned to the other bikers, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "We take Shadow with us. We honor her wish. We make him family." A thunderous cheer broke from the bikers, ragged but fierce. The townspeople clapped. The family wept openly, clutching each other as if clinging to hope itself. Shadow let out a low, trembling woof, almost a sob, and lowered his massive head in acceptance. He wasn't alone anymore. Not anymore. And as the sun bathed the muddy cemetery in warm gold, it was clear to everyone present. This was more than a funeral. It was a promise, a beginning. But none of them yet knew the challenges that promise would bring. Shadow's journey, and the final test of loyalty, love, and trust, was only just beginning. The rain had stopped, but the earth was still wet beneath their boots as the bikers formed a loose circle around Sophie's grave. The bear stood nearby, silent and watchful, his dark fur matted with mud, the girl's delicate bracelet still tangled around his scarred leg. The silver-bearded biker knelt first, resting one hand on the smooth wood of her coffin. One by one, the others followed, heads bowed, hands resting against the earth that cradled her. There were no grand speeches, no need for them. Their leader spoke simply. By Sophie's spirit, we swear, we protect Shadow, as she protected him. Each biker repeated it, voices rough with emotion but unwavering. Shadow let out a low, broken rumble, almost as if he understood. The oath was sealed. The mission was clear. Winning Shadow's trust wasn't easy. The bikers approached with slow, careful movements, offering small pieces of food, apples, bread, bits of meat, laid gently at their feet. No sudden gestures, no loud voices, only patience, only respect. At first, Shadow kept his distance, his body tensed to flee. But the familiar smell of Sophie's bracelet, the kind eyes of these strange leather-clad humans, and the lingering bond of grief drew him closer. One biker, a quiet woman with a deep scar down her cheek, sat cross-legged in the mud, extending a hand palm up. It took nearly an hour before Shadow finally shuffled forward, cautiously sniffing her hand, his wet nose brushing her fingers. When he accepted the offering, the bikers let out silent sighs of relief. The bond had begun, but there was no time to waste. They knew the town wouldn't stay quiet forever. There were already whispers of animal control, of hunters. Shadow wasn't safe here. The plan was as daring as it was desperate. They would move Shadow across 2 state lines, through backroads and wilderness, to a sanctuary tucked deep in the mountains. A place Sophie's diary had mentioned. A place where Shadow could live without fear. The bikers loaded supplies into their saddlebags. Food, water, tarps to shield Shadow from curious eyes. One biker customized an old pickup truck, padding the back with mattresses and rigging a makeshift cover. Shadow, surprisingly, trusted them enough to climb in when gently coaxed. And so the journey began. The road was rough, full of unseen dangers. There were moments when Shadow grew restless, bumping against the sides of the truck, groaning low with unease. The bikers took turns riding beside him in the back, murmuring softly, feeding him scraps, keeping him calm. Once, at a checkpoint, a patrol officer peered suspiciously at their convoy. The bikers closed ranks, bluffing their way through with stories of personal cargo and urgent charity work. Heartbeats pounded like war drums until they were safely past. Another night, camped by a river, they were startled awake by Shadow's frantic huffing. A pack of coyotes had crept too close, drawn by the smell of food. The bikers formed a defensive circle, torches blazing, standing guard while Shadow pressed against them, trusting their protection. Through it all, sleepless nights, broken roads, hunger, exhaustion, Sophie's memory rode with them. Each mile, each hardship was a tribute to her. Sometimes in the quiet stretches between towns, memories surfaced unbidden. Sophie laughing as she wove tiny bracelets under the shade of an old oak. Sophie slipping food into her backpack, sneaking off to her secret friend. Sophie kneeling beside a wounded cub, whispering comfort into trembling fur. Those flashes burned behind the bikers' eyelids, fueling their determination when their bodies wanted to collapse. They had failed to save Sophie. They would not fail her last wish. Finally, after days that felt like months, they crested a hill and saw it. The sanctuary. Sprawling forests stretching as far as the eye could see. Sparkling rivers carving silver paths through green valleys. Open fields dotted with wildflowers. Freedom. Safety. The bikers pulled up to the heavy gates, hearts pounding with a strange mix of triumph and grief. Shadow poked his massive head out from under the tarp, sniffing the air. Something in him changed then. The fear eased, the tension drained from his powerful frame. He knew. This was the place Sophie had promised him, his forever home. The farewell was the hardest part. The bikers led Shadow to the entrance of the sanctuary, where a staff member, tears glistening in her eyes after hearing their story, waited to take him deeper into the protected lands. Shadow lingered at the gate. He looked back, once, twice, whimpering softly. The scarred woman with the gentle voice stepped forward. She slipped the girl's bracelet, now weathered but still strong, from her own wrist and, with careful tenderness, tied it once more around Shadow's broad paw. Her hands trembled as she stepped back. Shadow stared at them all, his deep eyes shining. Then, with one last soft huff, barely a whisper, he turned and padded into the trees. Gone. Free. Loved. Back in town, weeks later, the bikers returned to Sophie's grave. They worked in silence, installing a new stone marker beside her. Simple words, carved deep and proud. She taught us to love beyond fear. Fresh flowers were laid beside it. A child's bracelet was wrapped around the base. The sun set behind the hills, bathing the cemetery in gold and crimson, and far in the distance, beyond the misty trees, a dark figure stood watching. Silent. Faithful. A protector in the shadows. Shadow was still there, guarding the town, guarding her memory, keeping the promise alive. Forever.